welcome you, Brother Abdul Karim, Leslie Terebesi. Did I say that correctly?
Well, actually, the Hungarian way of pronouncing it, but I don't expect you to pronounce it that way. It's actually pronounced Terebeshi, but please just
Terebesi.
yeah,
Terebesi.
it's a Hungarian name, but you just can say Terebesi. That's fine.
Okay, very good. Well, in any case, welcome back to our Tuesday session. And I'd like to inform the people that you are involved in um, academic research, which is very enlightening with respect to what has happened in Islam to establish what we call the traditional perspective, which Brother Karim says has eclipsed Islam in so much that it has eclipsed the Quran by replacing the Quran with a preoccupation and an elevation above the Quran of the Hadith, many of which we know and has been confirmed by several scholars have been fabricated. And instead of telling us which ones are actually genuine, there seems to be a reticence on the part of the traditional community to differentiate the hadith and make it very, very clear to the man on the street what is reliable and what is not reliable, unreliable, you see. So we know there have been hadith wars. We know that these things have existed. We know that the majority of the hadith have been fabricated. We know that it's an impossibility to consider, to analyze, or to learn all 500,000 of these supposed hadith. And this is established. This is not a question anymore. It's not even worth any kind of argument, if you will. And I tend to avoid getting involved with people who want to defend the traditional position because it's a waste of time, actually, because they have established what we might want to consider, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brother Karim, they have established what we might want to consider a separate religion, a different religion other than the Islam which our blessed Prophet has handed to us. And so we have these internecine wars between this various sects in Islam. The two of the greatest sects are the Sunni versus the Shia, and we have the madhabs, and that always confused me. Well, if you have these four madhabs, and these are the major approaches to genuine knowledge. My question has always been, well, why after 1200 years are they still arguing over how to pray? They can't seem to come to any agreement. And if they can't come to an agreement over that, what else are they not coming to agreement to and pretending to agree on? So, in any case, I'm very, very happy to have you with us again. And I truly want you to know that I appreciate your work in this area because it's an area that's beyond my ken. It's an area that I'm aware of, but I'm not knowledgeable in. So you are filling a void for me. And I'm sure in doing that, you're also filling a void for many of my students and other students who are pursuing this expansion of knowledge. All right. As Brother Benjamin Bilal called it yesterday in a meeting I had with him, expansion of knowledge. We are not so much revising as we are expanding what we know. And part of that expansion is this sine wave of attaining knowledge and then saying, okay, well, we've attained this, but if we want to reach the peak of the sine wave, in order to get there, you have to discard certain things that you can't take to the top, okay, in order to reach that moment of connection of salat with the samawat, with our creator, and say, okay, this is a point of truth. This is a moment of truth. But in order to get there, it's like walking in the desert. You have to discard things which are slowing you down or taking the energy or taking away in a negative way what you need to survive, what we need to actually activate what we like to think of as Islam. And Islam is a conscious recognition of our Creator and a conscious joining with our Creator in this action we call guidance. Okay. It's action. You see, it's not just an abstract idea. You can't just have Islam and rub your head against a carpet and make yourself a nice little brown mark up here and think you've made it. That's not it. Islam is deeds, good deeds. These are what we take to us to the grave. Where are they? You see, this is what I want to know. Where are they? And if we're just practicing Islam to perpetuate the production of a priesthood like any other religion, I think we've missed the point, because what we need to do is produce a dynamic polity that is achieving union with the truth, with Allah, and expressing this union by action, correct action. And you can't have correct action without justice. And if you're tolerating injustice within your environment, like we spoke of last time with many of these foul things which are going on in our so-called madrasas, this is not Islam. It cannot be an expression of truth. It cannot be an expression of our union with the divine order. It cannot be. So we've deviated. And so what we want to do is we want to climb up this mountain, this sine wave, and here, and we'll come back down, and then we have to rest a little bit to digest what we've done. Then we'll climb again, and this ongoing vibratory activity between us and the Samawat and our Creator and the angelic kingdoms and these things of the unseen, all of these will then be able to partake in order to make Islam relevant. But if we're following a tradition which we now know and is now acknowledged is filled with lies, filled with falsifications, filled with fabrications, and they've been elevated above the Quran, we cannot do this. We cannot complete this union. We cannot walk the path. We cannot follow the Tao. We cannot seek the light of truth, because there is a blindness. And this blindness is really severe. If you are just simply a traditionalist, you will not change your way. And if you don't change your way of thinking, the way in which you are walking, if it's deviant, you're going to miss the mark. Just like a bowman who sneezes at the last moment, he's not going to hit that bullseye. Something's wrong there, you see. And so, Brother Karim, last time we spoke, you described your 4 steps of the subversion of Israel, of Islam, by this traditional approach to the Hadith, the traditional approach to what is called the Sunnah, or the example of the Prophet's life, and much of which is not reliable. And but your 4 stages are very, very specific in their development, and you led us in that last meeting to Al-Ghazali, and I'd like to pick it up from there, if you don't mind. I edited a translation of one of Al-Ghazali's works years ago when I was a research fellow. Everybody thought I was a literary expert in English, which I'm not. But there I was. I was the token white guy, and I spoke English. It was my native language, and I was a doctor, so I had a couple of published books behind me, and so voila, I must be the expert. So they handed me this treatise that was translated from, I think, the Persian into English. And I read through it and I corrected what I could of it. And I found myself in this process arguing with this man, Al-Ghazali, at 3:00 in the morning. on more than one occasion. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go into any details because I don't really, it's been so long ago, I don't remember all the details. I don't even remember the essence of the arguments as I sit here. Um, so, but what I do remember is in reading afterwards, because this process got me interested in Ghazali, and I read a few things about his biography and then some of his doctrines. And it seems he had two doctrines. One was public and one was esoteric. One was for his students only. And he instructed his students, like our Masonic brethren, not to tell the public what they were given. Can you shed any light on that, uh, dear brother? I might be putting you on the spot, but I'm just curious. Can you shed any light on that with respect to your research and its relationship to what became tradition? Because Ghazali is a benchmark, it seems. Now, some people say he's been misunderstood. Some people think he responsible for the removal of Muslim consciousness from the rational world and a preoccupation with things that really don't matter, you see. I'm concerned with things that do matter, and so are our students. They want relevance. So, how did this man called Al Ghazali influence traditionalism? And if you could shed some light on that, I would surely appreciate it. Thank you very much, inshallah.
Well, thank you once again, Brother Omar, for this opportunity to share some thoughts with your good self and your viewers. About Al-Ghazali, my first exposure to Al-Ghazali was back in 2002 in my first year of teaching at the Islamic Science University of Malaysia, when someone recommended to me his book Deliverance from Error. And I must admit, the book was very well written. I read it in English, excellent English, and the content was also excellent. Almost everything, except one sentence that I was really taken aback, very powerfully by. And the sentence read, by the way, the sentence was based on a hadith. The sentence read that, I'm paraphrasing almost verbatim, let me put it that way, that I quote, a Muslim cannot say a bad thing about another Muslim, even if it is true.
Oh dear.
End of quote. I repeat, Al-Ghazali writes in the Deliverance from Error that, I quote, a Muslim cannot say a bad thing about another Muslim, even if it is true. End of quote. And by the way, on page 9, Roman numerals, in another book of his, the Book of Knowledge, he refers to the Prophet Muhammad as, I quote, this is verbatim, the Lord of mankind, end of quote.
Oh dear.
Exactly. So when I read that sentence, I was wondering, well, if Muhammad, peace be on him, is the Lord of mankind, then who is Allah?
Yeah.
So I'm astonished. There's a possibility, of course, that the sentence was inserted by someone, that he didn't say it. But if he did, I think there's a serious problem here. But anyway, to come back to the earlier statement that we cannot say anything bad about another Muslim, even if it is true, I took this up with a few colleagues at the university. I didn't get much of a response, but my argument was that if we follow this advice, we will never ever convict any criminal of any crime, because no one will be able to testify against a criminal, because that would entail having to say something bad about the accused.
Yeah, that kind of makes everybody a Catholic priest, doesn't it? Even if you're in the confessional and you receive this knowledge, you have to keep it to yourself. It's between you, the sinner, and God, right? So it's not part of the public domain. Well, that's a kind of a closeted approach to any form of justice. You see, it can't be had.
Right. And so I recall the verse in Surah An-Nisa, Surah number 4, where Allah Ta'ala says in verse 135, "O you who believe, stand up for justice, even against your own self, and be witnesses for." So now I compare the two statements, and I see that they are not compatible. Because if I follow what Al-Ghazali is teaching me, I will not be able to do what Allah is asking me to do. I will not be able to be a witness for justice if I follow what Al-Ghazali is teaching. And if I follow what Allah is teaching, I will not be able to follow what Al-Ghazali is teaching. So my humble opinion is that here, Al-Ghazali, and there are examples where he does something similar. Here, Al-Ghazali is going directly against the teaching of Al-Quran. And he is actually being very un-Islamic. And I don't hesitate to say that and put it into the public domain.
Well, why would he do that?
The reason he would do that, I think, good question. I think, we have in the Muslim world a culture of closing one eye and sometimes closing both eyes. We have a lot of corruption in the Muslim world, partly because people are following Al-Ghazali's advice rather than Allah's advice. They don't want to say anything bad about other people, even if it is true. In some cases, in some countries, and I won't mention any names, the people that spoke the truth have disappeared without a trace.
Yes.
So they are willing to do this, but they are not willing to take the, people to court. On a happy note, I can report that just today it was announced that the former Prime Minister of Malaysia today was his appeal was rejected, and he is on his way to prison to serve 12 years in prison. Plus, he has to pay a fine, I think, of $210 million. I think it's Malaysian dollars, although I'm not sure about that. Confirm that. And so this would be a very new development in the Muslim world, where the criminal justice system is actually sending anyone or a person, convicted of corruption into prison. I was quite close to the late Said Hussein Alatas, the older brother of Naqib Alatas, whom you know.
Yes.
And he has written 4 books on corruption. And we used to discuss once a week for almost a year. I was a regular guest in his house from 10 p.m. until 3:30 a.m. every Thursday. We would discuss most of the time.
Oh, my gosh.
I know. I would excuse myself while I'm 3:30 by saying, Prof, I think I'm going, because the discussion was still very good. I was enjoying it. We could have been there until 7 a.m.
We should have a special session on that alone sometime.
So I had to, basically I said, Prof, I need to go, because if I don't go and get some sleep, I will for sure fall asleep during a Friday prayer, so.
Yes.
But yeah, so we had some excellent, discussions, and I, of course, don't want to go into the details of the politics of, what we discussed. And he wouldn't, of course, put everything on the table either, and rightly so. I wouldn't do it either, but he gave me enough information to know that the corruption is a huge problem in the Muslim world, massive.
Yes, it is.
Massive. And we don't even have, even Edip Yüksel says that in Turkey, very few ulama are willing to say that corruption is a crime. Fasad, I think normally is that's the Arabic word. Yes. But here I would like to make a correction, because I watched the video recently. Someone from the Al-Mawrid Institute appeared on Let the Quran Speak, and there he was taking a traditional position on verse number 33 in Surah number 5, which is the verse that allegedly prescribes punishments for highway robbery, hiraba, cutting off of the hands and feet on opposite sides, expulsion, exile, crucifixion, and what have you. Now, as Muhammad Asad points out in his footnote on this verse, that verse has been misunderstood by traditionalists to be a legal verse, but it is not. And as proof, Muhammad Asad alludes to the fact that that verse is written in Arabic language. It uses the present tense, not the future tense, as all the other legal verses use. So in other words, the verse describes, it does not prescribe what people should do. It merely describes the habit of people, what people do with highway robbers, but it doesn't say what they should do. So here we have an example of a very serious lapse in traditional jurisprudence, where this verse was wrongly identified as a legal verse with some pretty bad consequences for people. So this is one of the problems in the traditionalist approach. It's not sufficiently intellectual, you see. And I recall when you spoke about tradition, Muhammad Abdul, I think it was in his book on Tawheed, he referred to traditionalism as, I quote, a disease, end of quote. And of course, other people condemn this blind following of tradition without the reflection.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's okay to follow someone's opinion if you know the reasons why you are doing it, and if you agree with that opinion on the basis of your own examination of the validity of that point of view. That is not blind following. That may be
Mm-hmm.
following, but it's rational following. So
Yes.
Jabir Al-Wani makes that distinction in one of his books. But blind following, this has been a bane of the Muslim community from early on, from the time that reason or rationality was repressed. And as I mentioned in our last meeting, there have been several waves of this repression of rationality and reason. And Imam Al-Ghazali, to come back to the topic, he
Yes,
played
please.
his part in this because he rejected a very essential and basic primary principle of reason and rationality, and that is the principle of causality, the connection between cause and effect.
Yes.
According to him, everything that happens as a result of the will of Allah. If I kill somebody, I can say I didn't do it. Allah made me do it.
Mm-hmm.
You see what he's doing. So
Yes,
this
yes, I've seen that.
this resulted directly in the so-called doctrine of predestination or determinism or fatalism, as some people call
Yes,
it.
fatalism, right?
And this paved the way for the utter moral corruption of the Muslim community, because once again, like that earlier comment he made, which I said, if we take it literally, will prevent us from ever convicting anyone of any crime. This
Mm-hmm.
perception that everything is done from Allah's will, even crimes according to are committed because Allah willed it so.
Mm-hmm.
This basically gives the criminals, it relieves them from responsibility for their crimes, and in fact places the responsibility for these crimes on Allah Himself. Now, can you
Yeah.
believe?
Well, this is kind of like, well, it's a scapegoat, you see. Well, instead of saying the devil made me do it, you say Allah made me do it. You see,
Yeah,
it's
I think
Allah's will that I'm a sinner and a murderer and a rapist and a pedophile, or whatever the case may be, a thief. Um, this is inexcusable. Ghazali
absolutely.
actually taught this.
Yes, it's part of a, and about justice, by the way.
Hmm.
There's a paper on a website called New Age Islam. The chief editor wrote
Hmm.
a paper on this issue, and he even quotes Al-Ghazali, where Al-Ghazali puts the following words into Allah's mouth, as it were. He puts words in Allah's mouth,
I see.
and these words show a utter disregard for justice. And the words go like this. The quotation goes like this. I quote practically verbatim. I quote, "These to bliss, and I don't care, and these to hell, and I don't care." In other words, Al-Ghazali is making Allah look like he doesn't he doesn't care at all about justice, that he puts people to hell and Jannah totally arbitrarily, without any regard for what these people have done in the past, without any regard to their deeds.
Yeah, I've
So what
seen that. I've seen that in the literature, and it seemed unbelievable to me.
exactly?
So, what we're discussing here, brother, is it gives justification for Islam's detractors. You
Yes, of
see,
course it does. Absolutely.
the militant position that you described last week, and now this position, God doesn't care. Well,
Yeah.
I realize that Allah may not be. I think most of us understand that Allah is not needful of our destiny. He doesn't need it. If He provides it, provides an avenue for us to please ourselves by pleasing Him. Well, so much for the better. But if we wind up making the choice to become corrupt and to blame it on Him and going to hell, I don't think Allah's going to, lose any sleep over that. Not that Allah sleeps, but um, you understand what I'm saying. So this kind of thinking, this is irrational,
Totally
which is
irrational.
which is your premise to begin with, where we started a few weeks ago. It's completely irrational, and any thinking man who looks at these particular principles that are followed by the majority of Muslims will dismiss Islam right offhand, just having read this stuff without looking any further. So, with that in mind, I always said that had it been, um, had I depended upon Muslim example for my conversion, it never would have happened. You see, my conversion was based on reading Yusuf Ali's translation of the Holy Quran. As error prone as that might be, it still worked. It worked on me. And it worked on me because I knew a lot of what was spoken of in pre-scripture and the parascriptural literature. So even the poor translation, as good as it might be, you could still say it's error prone. It worked because the Quran is very powerful, and the Quran solved an awful lot of problems which I had confronted as a Christian, as a student of comparative religion, as a budding academic, if you will, and as a medical doctor, because there are conundrums you run into when you're confronted by certain ethical positions. Now, I had no trouble with the ethical position. I always had trouble with traditional explanations and approaches to morals and ethics. Some things just didn't make sense. But when I read the Quran, hey, everything fell into place, and I immediately became a Muslim. But afterwards, when I was constantly hit in the face by the waters of traditionalism, I said, well, where is the Islam I read? Where is the Islam that I read about in the Quran? Where is it? Where are the morals? Where are the ethics? Where are the higher principles that we should be pursuing if we're the best of all peoples, you see? And certainly it doesn't seem that way. We have the best of all intentions, but our enemies are fully justified in disarming us, if you will, or even arming us to kill each other, which is what they're doing, in the political realm. That's what they're doing because they say, well, these are just worthless eaters, and they're totally irrational. They're not going to advance the cause of mankind anywhere in the earth. We might as well just let them kill each other. So we got ISIL here, we got ISIS there, we've got the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, the Taliban, and all these other stupid people murdering other Muslims armed by their enemies who rightly criticize their theological and philosophical positions. And now you're telling me, dear brother Abdul Karim, that Ghazali can be blamed for some of this.
Yeah, and I would say that Imam Al-Ghazali actually deserves credit for more than what he's normally given credit for. There are people like Mahmoud Gamal. He has a website. He's in the United States. He's a specialist in Islamic finance. He wrote also that after Al-Ghazali, for the next 700 years, there was no significant development in the empirical sciences. And by the way, also, once you do away with the principle of causality, in science, we have this cause and effect expressed in a mathematical algebraic equation, y equals f at x, the magnitude of y, or the dependent variable. It depends on the independent variable x according to some function f. So the moment you abolish causality or cause and effect relationships, you have basically scuttled all science.
Yes.
And this, by falling behind in the sciences, left the Muslims at the mercy of their enemies, who developed superior weapons with which they were later able to defeat the Muslims.
Yes.
In Turkey, the printing press was banned for 272 years on the grounds that this was some kind of a satanic invention. It didn't seem to occur to the ulama that you could use the printing press also for something good, like for printing extra copies of the Quran and do da'wah all over the world.
Yes.
You see the kind of thinking that we are looking at here. They just simply assume that the person will do the worst rather than the best. And in fact, there's a concept of husn zan, in Islam, that we are supposed to think, like giving benefit of doubt to people. We are supposed to think of people well. We should not jump to conclusion and assume that they are out to do the worst. I remember when I would occasionally have discussions with some of my female colleagues at the university in the hallway, of course, in broad public view.
Yes.
People would come down by and give me this look as if they knew what I was after, as if I had some kind of a
Yes.
obvious hidden agenda. I said, my God,
Yes.
grow up, dude. What's
Hmm.
wrong with
Hmm.
you? This is the thinking of 11-year-olds, you see.
Hmm. Yes.
So why do they make such assumptions about people? So anyway, so the anti-rationalism proved very costly. And not only that, I believe that by, abandoning reason, Muslims also made it more difficult for them to understand the Quran. I don't believe
Yes.
anyone can understand the Quran unless they apply their akal, their reason, their mind. And
Hmm.
doesn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell us so many times in the Quran to use our reason, our akal? Afala takilun, afala tatadabbarun, and zikir is used frequently, and ilm. So these anti-rationalists, I kind of, how do I put this? I have a feeling there's something fanatical in this opposition to reason and rationalism. But
Yes.
maybe correct me if that word is too strong. So they
No.
have this deep hatred for thinkers and academics and intellectuals, and they slaughtered 5,000 of them during the reign of Musa al-Hadi. Brother, can you just give me a few seconds? I need to plug in my
Yes.
machine. I thought I had enough power. 1 second, please. We'll be
Yes.
back after this commercial break, folks. Just hold on
Okay.
there.
Very good. Go ahead, brother. So, yes, there are many, many things here that Brother Karim is teaching us and teaching myself as we go along in this dialogue, including the slaughter of the philosophers. We were talking about the slaughter of reason. We're talking about the slaughter of philosophy. We might as well, as I said last week, we might as well just have a catechism and turn off your mind and just believe and kowtow. So it's another form of idolatry. It's another form of shirk, this blind following, and they pretend that it's not blind because this is an interesting phenomena, dear brother. The traditionalists are very keen on memorization, and well, you can memorize a phone book, and that's not going to give you much rationale besides what a detective might need to follow a lead down the street. But I've met people who memorized the Quran, but could recite it beautifully in Arabic, but they could not tell me what it meant. They could not
Uh,
translate it. They could not discuss the passage in any meaningful sense. Um, some of the best Muslims I've met who were much better informed than uh, many of the academic so-called imams that I've met were taxi drivers who were self-educated. And I remember driving around KL with these taxi drivers who spoke reasonably good English, and I had wonderful conversations with them about Islamic theology and history and the meanings of this, that, and the next things, where I couldn't make any progress in an academic forum, especially with respect to what you just brought up here, science. If you remove cause and effect and these variables, there's no thought left. You might as well just have a straight line and think the earth is flat. And we have a significant movement in the Umma right now, sponsored by unseen corridors. Uh, you know, where people are thinking, Muslims are thinking the world is flat because they've taken a few phrases out of the Quran, out of context, and applied them with this false approach to science, which does not really give us the true cause and effect. I've been inundated with several of these people now, and I just won't discuss it with them. I immediately dismiss them. And it's sad to see because some of them actually they're well-meaning people. They have great intentions, but this diversion away from science. I remember going to a Islamic science conference and presenting the only scientific paper there, and it was rejected.
Unbelievable.
It was on the development of the human mind with respect to the gender, the gender aspects, the male and female aspects of the human brain, and it was rejected offhand. Uh, but they wanted to publish the paper on voodoo. You see, well, we've had 1,200 years of voodoo and obsession. This is obsessive compulsive disorder. The entire Umma is obsessed with ritual, and it's rejecting reason. And
Absolutely.
and you're telling me that Al-Ghazali was largely responsible for this. That's unfortunate. Do you have any insight as to what he taught his disciples privately and what he taught publicly?
Yeah. I recall that comment you made. Well, as you know, the concept of taqiyya is common among Shias. Now, I'm not saying he
Yes,
was a Shia, but he was Persian after all.
yes,
And
right.
interestingly, I recall the book written by the leader of one mazhab that I used to associate with, or school of thought. They are all sort of based in America. They are I call them the Friends of Leo Strauss.
Ah, yes.
I don't know if you heard about him,
that's
but
that's an interesting phrase. Thank you very much. I might
yeah,
use that.
yeah. So one of his books, he was called that he wrote, "Persecution and the Art of Writing." And
Hmm.
he was actually he was trained, I think, to sort of in a rabbinical method of reading the Torah. He turned away from that and from Zionism as well. Yeah, as a young
Hmm.
man into that, but he turned away from both and began focusing on the Western philosophers and began differentiating between tradition and modernity in Western thinking. So, and he claims there was a massive turn in Western thinking from the classical tradition to the tradition of modernity, the realpolitik of Machiavelli, the separation of morality from politics. That those are all modern phenomena, at least traditional morality. But anyway,
Hmm.
in that book of his, Persecution and the Art of Writing, he argued that in the old days, these people, including Machiavelli, sometimes wrote contradictory passages, and it was like insurance, that if somebody accused you of saying this, you could point to the other passage and say, no, but over here I wrote this. And
Hmm.
so in order to get the real message out of the book, you needed to decode it so in other words, this was esoteric writing, not exoteric
Hmm.
writing. So this was intended for a small group of initiated or initiates,
Yes,
a
yes.
little bit
Hmm.
cultish. And in fact, that was one of the reasons why I mean, this whole idea of cultishness, or I sense there was something going on here that, I mean, I believe that we should state the truth openly, but to do it in a way that is suitable, as Al Quran says
Hmm.
in verse 125, Surah 16, speak to them in the best way. So we can speak the truth, but we need to do it in the best way. So what
Hmm.
is the best way to speak to people? So like, for instance, I have encountered these issues in traditional exegesis and jurisprudence that to me seem to have elements of politism, like placing the Quran on an equal level with the Hadith, for example.
Yes.
So instead of referring to it as politism, I, as it were, coined the phrase. I think it's a new phrase because when I Googled it, in quotation marks, I couldn't find any results. No results came back. No, in other words, no one else is using it on the whole internet. So I'm not sure
Hmm.
whether that's good or not. But the phrase is scriptural polytheism. You see, so
Hmm.
I'm suggesting that when we make the hadith equal to the Quran, we are
Hmm.
falling into this scriptural polytheism. Yeah, because we
Yes.
are making words of human beings equal to the words of God. To me, that is
Yes.
terrible. And
Hmm.
as we discussed last time, actually, it didn't stop there. It went further. The words of people were actually elevated above the words of God in at least three different ways. They were said to judge or explain the words of the Quran, to abrogate the Quran, and even to replace parts of the Quran, some rulings
Hmm.
in the Quran by rulings based on tradition. So this was a very catastrophic, I think, development, resulting from not using reason or the intellect sufficiently to see the enormity of this lapse. You see, I think this
Hmm.
was a a catastrophic mistake on the part of the traditional exegetes, because it confused the people, confused the words of the hadith became almost interchangeable with the words of Allah and what have you. So these problems, all arose, as I mentioned initially, from this disdain for reason, and people are taught in madrasas very often that you should not use your reason, because if you do that, you could become a kafir. There, as I
Yes.
mentioned, two hadiths that say that anybody who uses reason-based tafsir is committing an act of kufr. So this hadith basically shut down the Muslim mind, and we have books that have been written by Abdul Hamid Abu Sulaiman called "The Crisis in the Muslim Mind," 1993, triple IT. There was a book by Robert Riley, who is not a Muslim though, I have to caution, who called his book "The Closing of the Muslim Mind." Then we have Mustafa Akyol's book "Reopening the Muslim Minds," and there are some other texts as well. But so what I'm trying to say is that yes, Al-Ghazali, and to come back to your question, why did he do it? You see,
Yes.
Muhammad Shahrur has an interesting explanation for this in his book called Quran, Morality and Critical Reason. He says that the ulama, the traditional ulama, became allied to the caliphs, to the powers that be, and they provided them with the kind of interpretation of the Quran that would protect them from accusations of being unjust and doing irrational and un-Islamic things. You see, so when you say that all crimes actually are willed by Allah, including the slaughter of at Karbala and elsewhere, then the people who perpetrated these crimes should not be held responsible for any of these injustices.
Yes.
And by the way, the leading Shafi scholar, al-Shatibi, who is credited with developing the theory of the so-called higher objectives of the Sharia, which are the protection of life, religion, property, reputation, and the intellect, by the way. Notice the irony. He said we need to protect the intellect. There's one objective or purpose of the Sharia which is missing, and that is justice. Why is justice missing from his list of the objectives of the law? Shouldn't justice, in fact, be the first priority of any law?
Of course.
Exactly. So he leaves it out. Now, what is the result of this disdain for justice and rationality? Muslim history is not well known for justice. How do I put it? I even read in a book edited by Alaeddin Karofa, I think it was called Islamic Simple Religion. There's a fellow called Al-Raji. He writes, this is again almost verbatim, I quote, "Justice is alien to Islam." End of quote. He uses the word alien to refer to justice in Islam. I was shocked. I could not believe what I was reading. The extent of ignorance in some of these writings is just astonishing. So I think one reason why Al-Ghazali, wrote like this was maybe he thought that, let's be united. Let's not accuse each other of any crimes. And if everybody keeps quiet and overlooks, you see, other people's wrongdoings, I think here he was confusing, like the Hadith does, backbiting with testifying against a potential criminal. The two are very different. Yes, backbiting is wrong. I agree. We don't make fun of someone behind their back that he's overweight or whatnot. But testifying in a criminal trial against a criminal, that is not backbiting. That is testifying for truth and justice. And this is what Al-Ghazali took out of of Islam. And not only that, the moment you take out cause and effect, you take out a lot of the teaching of the Quran too, because the Quran teaches us, of course, we know first that Allah created the universe, so that kind of cause and effect he recognizes, because everything is caused by Allah. But what about if I go to Jannah or Jahannam? If I go to, it is my actions that become the cause of where I am heading. If I'm a criminal committing evil deeds, I can expect that that's the cause. I'm committing evil acts, that's the cause. The effect is that I end up in hell or in a fire. So and similarly, if I do good deeds and Allah is pleased with them, then that is the cause, and the effect is I end up in a garden. So that is cause and effect too, you see. So the moment you put aside this cause and effect, you take out a huge chunk of the teaching of the Quran out of it, of Islam. So you undermine the teaching of the Quran by rejection causality. Not big. What I'm saying is that Quran is full of references to cause and effect. You see,
Yes.
and
Yes.
all refers to things like Allah is. This is what they have earned because of what their hands have sent forth. Right? It was not
Yes.
Allah's
Yes.
hands that I mentioned. It's their hands. Right?
Yes. Right.
So this is very clear. So what I'm
This
saying
is
is that
contradictory. You see.
exactly. So he
Hmm.
seriously corrupted our knowledge of the Quran. I think so.
Yes.
We can lay at his door much of the blame for the entire decline of the whole Muslim civilization, not just for
Mm.
the retardation of the empirical sciences. So I'm speaking a little bit ironically when I say that he
Yes.
deserves credit for a lot more than that. A lot more
Yes.
damage is what I mean. You
Yes.
see. And by the way, if you look into Bukhari, can you show me any book on justice? I don't think so, bro. I don't.
Right.
There isn't
No.
one.
No,
if
it's
you look,
not there. It's not there. It's
yeah,
not there.
if you look into Bukhari, can you show me a book on ethics?
Mm.
Not there. Can you show me a
Not
book
there.
on akal or reason? Not there. So, by leaving out these very important topics, Bukhari has stripped the Quranic teaching of three very important parts of its teaching. You see, so what we get in Bukhari, unfortunately, is a kind of parody almost, or I think of it sometimes as a caricature of the real teaching of Islam. It's really a very small and but you can find 98 hadiths on where to put your hands, where you pray. Here,
Yes.
here, here.
Yes.
98 hadiths. Now, that is a lot of detail. As you mentioned, there has been a massive shift of emphasis from, ethics and justice and intellect to ritual, right?
Yes.
Blind following. And so people think that Allah, that when we put our head on the floor, that we are worshiping, this is worship of Allah. Well, Allah asked the angels to prostrate to Adam, and would he ask them to worship Adam? Of course not. So
Of course not.
prostration alone is not worship.
No, it's not.
Worship takes place, I think, more in terms of your actions. Are you willing to help a needy person? Are you willing to say a kind word to someone? Just the other day I
Hmm.
was watching a few videos from America, the homeless people in the cities. It's just amazing, brother.
Yes,
The
I know.
misery and the agony and the tents on the streets, lining the streets,
Mm.
and the drug addiction and this fentanyl explosion. Fentanyl is about
Mm.
1,000 times more powerful than heroin. You
Mm.
see, these people need help, you see.
Hmm.
But here
Yes.
the ulama want to help Allah to help him make himself clear by writing their tafsirs, which are sometimes quite off the mark, like when Ibn Kathir wrote that the Quran abrogates the previous revelations. Well, this is completely against what the Quran teaches. And he's
Yes.
considered to be one of the big exegetes. My God, may Allah protect us from such exegesis, if you ask me.
I
It
mean. I
is
mean.
completely opposite what the Quran teaches. So a lot of this so-called exegesis and even jurisprudence, there are some anti-Islamic elements here.
It seems that way, brother. And if you look at the word worship, which we have in English, if you look at the Hebrew origins of the word, which are the Semitic in basis, you trace them back to, I suppose, the Sanskrit, but um, it means to obey. Worship means to obey.
Yeah,
So
ibadah.
we are to listen and obey. We are to hear and obey. This is also quite prominent in the New Testament scripture. I think we should end it here for today, dear brother. Um,
Sure.
I would like to take this discussion of Al-Ghazali a step further
Certainly.
into the Sufi realms and this whole idea of some sort of occult influence here, especially out of Persia, because that's where it comes from. These things sort of migrated out of the ancient pre-Dravidian and Dravidian realms in what is now Pakistan, and they moved westward and settled there in Nimrod's kingdom in Babylon, and this is Persia. That's what it is. There was no Iraq in those days. It was all Persia. It had different names for the kingdom. That whole area, not just the area we call Afghanistan, is called Khorasan. So if there's something good coming out of Khorasan, I'd like to see that defined. But let's begin by looking a little bit more carefully at Al-Ghazali on our next meeting, inshallah, and take this a step further for our listeners, our students, and ourselves as we seek to clarify what has happened to Islam. How was Islam eclipsed by this traditional deviation, which has become the mainstream? You see, how can
Yeah.
we expand our knowing of the truth beyond this traditionalist cap on our reason? You see.
Yeah.
So I
Yes.
want to thank you once again, dear brother, for sharing
My pleasure.
what Allah has placed in you for the sake of ourselves and our listeners. And inshallah, we'll meet again next week, same time, same station.
Inshallah. And thank you for having me once again, Brother Omar. Always a pleasure.
Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi.